When do I make my first mortgage payment? My name is Evan Kaufman, your loan originator, here to help explain. Your first mortgage payment is not actually made immediately after closing on your home. How it works, I like to say, is you make your first mortgage payment the second month following your closing. What I mean by that is, if you close, say, in January, any time in the month of January, most likely your first payment is not going to be due February, it's going to be due March. So that gives you a little bit of time. And if you're wondering why that is, we'll explain why. So when you close on a home, you typically close some day of a month, right? There's no landing it right in between the 2 months. You're either going to be on the first of the month or the very end of the month, 30, 31st, or 28th for that matter for like February. And what happens is when you close, you have a prorated amount of interest due at closing. So if you notice on a closing statement, you're going to see on there prorated interest. And that's the amount of interest you have to pay for the month of when you close. So if you close on the first of the month, you're going to see a lot of days of prorated interest on that closing statement. And that's because normally when we're making our payments, we're making it effectively in arrears, so post living in the home. So it's like, hey, I lived in the home for February, and then in March, my first payment is due on the 1st. Some places, for the most part, it's like, hey, as long as you pay it by the 5th or the 15th, you're good. But point is, it says due on the 1st, you have your March payment for when you lived in the home during February. But if you close in January, you need to make a prorated amount of interest payment for the month of January. So you make that at closing. But then when February 1st hits, you don't actually make a payment because technically you're paying in arrears and you're going to make that payment in March. So that's why we always say, hey, it's that second month following close. So if you close January, then it's not going to be due February, it's going to be due March. If you close in June, your first payment's not going to be due July, it's going to be due August. And then the deal is, sometimes people are like, hey, I always get to skip a payment there, so we want to make sure we close earlier in that next month. Just remember, you have that prorated interest. So again, if you close at the start of the month, sometimes folks are like, well, Evan, I want to wait a little bit and close on July 1st versus the very end of June, because that way my payment is going to be due not in August, but in September. I understand that thought process. Just remember, you don't get away from not paying the interest, because at closing, you're going to have to make a bigger prorated payment of interest at close. So going back to that, let's say that January example, always easy to deal at the start of the year. If you said, hey, Evan, I want to make sure that I skip as many payments as possible for stuff. Some folks will assume, hey, rather than close in January, let's close February 1st. So then my first payment isn't March, it's April. But remember, if you close at the very start of a month, you owe prorated interest all up front at closing. That's for one time where you make an interest payment up front in the process. Otherwise, it's always done effectively after you've lived in the home. You make it that following month. So note that if you want to really make your first payment later, so moving closing to the start of a month, that just means be ready that you might have more cash due at closing because you have to make a higher prorated interest payment. Conversely, if you want to have less money due at closing for that prorated interest, then you might want to close later in the month so that you have fewer days of prorated interest, but then your first payment is going to be a little bit sooner. So let's say, hey, I could close at the very end of January. So I could close like January 30th or 28th or whatever and have maybe 1 or 2 days of prorated interest that I have to make. And then my first payment wouldn't be due February, it'd be due March. Great, but you're only going to be maybe 30-ish, 40, 30, 35 days from your first payment, but you'll have less money due at close because your prorated interest is really small. The moment you flop over and close on February 1st, now all of a sudden your first payment isn't March, it's now April. However, you got to bring the full month of February. You have to bring that prorated interest to closing. So it increases your closing costs. So it all kind of comes down to, hey, do I want to make sure when I'm closing that I have less cash due at closing and I'm okay with my payment being a hair sooner? Or if I'm okay bringing a little extra to close, that prorated interest, then all of a sudden I can have my payment a little bit later. I hope this demystified a little bit of just when your first mortgage payment is. Just always think about it. Hey, it's that second month after I close. Now, yes, there are scenarios where if you wanted to, you could try to pull that forward. Some lenders will work to where you can do short proration for everything and have your payment done sooner. 99% of loans, in fact, I think every single loan we've done, it's always going to be that following month thereafter, just because things have changed to where that is the norm now, and it makes it a little bit easier for folks. Now, when you're looking at refinances too, that can make a big impact when your first payment is. And sometimes, as we always talk about, because we do a lot of VA loans and a lot of VA loan refinance work, and so sometimes if you want, you can effectively skip 2 payments, but that's a whole nother video, another discussion that we have. But the basics of it are, when is your first mortgage payment due? It's that following month after you close, that second month after closing. So I close in January, it's not February, it's March. If I close in July, it's not August, it's September. So hope that helped demystify a little bit of when your first mortgage payment is. My name's Evan Kaufman again, your loan educator. Hope all is well. Take care.